So this is a short tutorial on working with custom components inside of Revit. And this is going to take the approach of really one of the first times you're opening up Revit. And one of the first things that I like to teach are the custom component tools, because they teach you one of the more complicated modeling features. Things get easier from there. They allow you to really model just about anything custom that you would want. And it also gives you the chance to really start navigating through the entirety of Revit by learning this simple tool set. So first of all, when you open up Revit, you have this opening screen, and we are going to start a new project with the architectural template. Starting that up, I've got over here in my project browser, I have my key views that are created inside of this template, the architectural template. I've got level 1, level 2 in sight, and the active view is whatever is bold in the text. So if I double click level 2, this gives me a level 2 view. I've got reflected ceiling plans and my elevations. One quick thing to note on the elevations, if I click on any of the elevation views, in particular the icon that generates the view, I can click on that front triangle and it's going to give me this blue line. That blue line is a section through my Revit scene represented as the elevation looking in this direction. And on occasion, your projects are going to go outside of that tag. And I want to show you what happens, just to kind of, again, show that that is a section. If I double click to go to my east elevation view, you can see I'm actually cutting a section through both of those walls. So as you're starting a project, typically you want to be in the center of this area. But if your project begins expanding past the border of those elevation tags, you want to make sure you're moving them outside of the project, both the icon and the section line, because those two pieces can move around independently. So I'm moving that section line by clicking on the triangle and moving that box around. And now you can see if I go back to the east elevation, you can see I'm seeing that set of walls now in elevation. So just be aware of that as you're starting out. The key thing to remember that I always try and remind people is every view in Revit, just about every view, is some kind of sectional view. So right now in my level 1, I am a section view looking down at a height of, if I remember correctly, 48 inches or 3 foot 6 inches, somewhere right around in that area, looking down into the view. So on to custom components. Custom components are one of the first things that I like to teach because, again, we can model just about anything with them. And the method that I'm going to show is simply breaking down the set of tools that you can use to start modeling with. So inside of the component drop-down, I'm going to click the little down arrow, and we're going to select Model in Place. As you get fairly advanced in Revit, you can certainly start assigning your custom components specific types of families to reside within. However, as you're learning Revit, I typically recommend sticking with one of the two views, either generic models or massing models. Now, the massing model is going to open up a more advanced set of tools. So again, first couple of passes, we're going to work with the generic model family for custom components. So I'm going to highlight generic models and select OK. And I'm not going to worry too much about the name. I'm just going to say OK to that as well. Immediately this top ribbon changes because we are now editing a family, and inside of that, so a family is essentially something that is nested inside of your Revit scene. To edit that family, I need to be editing, I need to select that object and edit it. So let's look at what that means really quick. I'm going to do a simple extrusion, and so now we're editing a part of a family that is a custom component. I'm going to draw a simple box. Right here, my extrusion start is 0, 0. Now that's not 0, 0 relative to the world. That is 0, 0 relative to level 1. And I'm going to tell that extrusion to be 10 feet tall. I'm going to click the green checkbox. Let's look at this in a 3D view. So you can see now that I have a box that is 10 feet tall. I am still in that family mode, or still editing that custom component, which is a family. I can select it and use the grips to move that further so you can see it's changed the extrusion end, or I can certainly come in and type a more precise number. If I want to change the sides, I have grips that I can start moving around for that as well But the other option that I have, if I want some precision, is to select that component or that part of my component, select Edit Extrusion, and now I can come in and begin editing the exact dimensions. And so what I'm doing with that is I'm selecting one of the lines, selecting the dimension string, or just the dimensions, I should say. This is a temporary dimension is what's showing up here. So I'm typing in the number 60 to make this a 60 by 60 by 30 rectangular cube form. Okay, so if you notice, I'm still inside of this custom component. So if I make another object, create extrusion, let's make another small box to go with it. Make that one 40 feet tall. I now have two objects that are nested inside of this family. I'm going to select Finish Model, and now I'm back to my full Revit scene. And so if you notice, those are two items that are grouped together. They are going to move together. There's really not much that I can do about separating them other than moving them around with the grips, which can get really scary because that's really not a very precise way to go about moving something. Unless I select the group, click Edit in Place. Now I'm back to editing this family. So now I can move them around independently, and I can begin to do some more precise things with them, including selecting each one, saying Edit Extrusion, and now I'm back to the root object, which is a set of purple lines that define that overall custom component. So let's green check that, and green check this, and get back to my overall Revit scene. So there are a couple of different ways to begin making parts using the custom component tool. So let's go back to architecture, and let's start a new in-place custom component. So again, my family is going to be a generic model. So we just covered doing a standard extrusion, which is simply drawing a base, selecting a height, and saying OK. But there are a few additional ways to make it. I can go back to Create, and I can build a blend. So a blend uses two different shapes, one for the top and one for the bottom. So this time I'm going to use the line tool. I notice I'm drawing on level 1. So I'll draw just sort of, I don't know, not sure what kind of shape that is. A shape. We'll call it A shape. So this is the base of my object. Now I can go to Edit Top, and I can draw a different shape. So right now I have these two shapes, and Revit is going to smooth between these two shapes at a height of 1 foot. So let's green check that. You can see I've got this sort of very shallow object, but if I change that height to say 40 feet, I've got a fairly complex object that's starting to come together by blending the bottom and the top shape to do something like this. Let's change my view from a hidden line to a shaded view. You can see a little bit more detail on how that's come together. Let's keep going on to the different methods. A revolve is a little bit more complicated form. Essentially, you can think of revolve as kind of like a lathe. So I'm going to start in my level 1 view, and I'm going to start by drawing my boundary line. So I'm going to come right across the middle, and then I'm going to do something curvy with the spline tool around the outside. And let's connect it back with a straight line, something like that. I'm going to select my axis line, which I'm going to draw in just like that. And that's just a line that represents what it's going to revolve around. So I don't really need to worry about its endpoints. I only need to worry about its location. Now if I green check this, it's going to build that overall form. If I select that object and come back to edit it, so edit revolve, if I move that axis line over, it will build that as a hollow shape, because again it's revolving around that axis line. So let's go on to my next method, a sweep. So this is best seen. Well, I'm going to keep in the 3D view. Typically I would make this in a level 1 view, but it's kind of nice as a demo to sort of see these coming together in a more volumetric view. So I'm going to keep it still drawing on level 1, but in this 3D view. So the suite view, I've got two things that I'm going to do. I've got a path to sketch, or I can select a path. Typically I start by sketching a path, and then I'm going to build a profile. So let's go to sketch path. So I'm going to draw basic set of lines, and let's end that basic set of lines with a spline. So we'll have something like this. And if you notice, this can be open-ended or it can also be closed. The very first line that I place, it's going to give me what's called a reference plane. That reference plane is what I need to draw my profile that's going to sweep along the path. So I'm going to green check. So now I'm out of sketching the path, and now I can edit my profile. So I'm going to click Edit Profile, and I've got a new set of drawing tools that are basically going to work directly on this reference plane. So that set of lines that I just drew are on that reference plane, which was on the first line that I drew along the sweep. So I'm going to green check to finish editing my profile, and then green check again to build the sweep. If you notice, didn't like building that sweep. And here's why. When it turned that corner, it was not able to resolve how that was going to work out. So let's go ahead and hit cancel. And let's see if we can't just simplify this down a little bit. I'm going to select my profile, edit profile, and let's just simplify this corner just a bit. And hopefully this time it won't turn in on itself too much, and it will be able to resolve that sweep for me. There we go. Perfect. So again, it's something you have to be very careful with the forms, because again, coming around this acute angle right here, it wasn't able to resolve how to build that form. And that's going to happen on both the sweep and this next piece, a swept blend. So just like our blend right here was moving in one direction, a swept blend will give you two reference planes, one at the beginning and one at the end of your sweep, and Revit is essentially going to smooth between those two different forms. So a swept blend, I'm going to start again by sketching my path. And let's just do a simple spline, something like that. So I have a curve, and this time I have two reference planes. Green check, profile 1, edit profile. Let's do a square. So you can see that square is now in my first reference plane. Green check, profile 2, and on this one, edit profile, and let's place a circle. Green check and green check, and you can see what Revit is doing is it's averaging out from that square shape to the circle at the end to do a swept blend. So the next thing to look at as we're building these forms is expanding on that idea of a reference plane that we saw in our sweeps, because the reference planes can be really useful things to work with, and they help you model things in the exact location that you need them. So there are two key ways that I typically go about building reference planes. One is using an existing object, and the second is to actually create my own reference plane. So what I'm going to do is let's start by using an existing object. I'm going to go to Architecture, Component, Model in Place, and again let's use the generic models. So if I go to Extrusion, I can come right here to this set of tools, which are my reference planes or my work plane tools. I'm going to go Set, and instead of naming a plane, which right now is set as a default to level 1, I'm going to select Pick a Plane, and then OK, and I can select this side of that box. I'm going to turn on Show really quick so you can sort of see, this will give you sort of this imaginary blue piece of paper that represents the reference plane that I can work in. Now, if I want to do something right off the side of this square or rectangle, I can draw directly on that. My sweep or my extrusion will move away from that and be in that exact location. Now, if you'll note that I'm not limited to that blue piece of paper, that virtual blue piece of paper. I'm going to go ahead and select that and turn on show again. I can actually draw infinitely anywhere in this, what I believe would be sort of the XZ or YZ plane. So I can come way over here and draw something off of that plane, but it's still going to be in that reference plane. So this is just a visual guide to help you understand that it essentially extends infinitely out in all directions like that. But really useful to use that tool, that idea of picking a plane to draw something in, especially if I'm going to come in and have something like millwork, cabinetry running along the inside of a wall that I need to basically frame out really quickly, or if I have a specific piece of structure or something that I know is going to be adjacent to a wall, then I might select that as a reference plane and just draw it directly in place in that location. Let's go ahead and finish that model, and let's look at the next method of doing a reference plane. That's sort of building a reference plane from scratch. So I'm going to go to level 1. Let's zoom out a bit and let's come in right around here. And I'm going to do this a little bit off at an angle. So this time I'm going to go to Architecture, and I'm going to go back to the Work Plane tool set, and I'm going to create a reference plane. And let's put one in sort of at an odd angle. So this is just 2 left clicks to create this reference plane. And really important to follow this next step. It says click to name. So I'm just going to call this reference plane 1. A little bit of a generic name there, but it's really important to name these so that it's going to show up in my view. So I'm going to go to my default 3D view, component, model in place, generic models 4, that's fine. And this time again I'm going to set my reference plane, and this is why naming that plane is so important. So this particular view is probably the wrong word, but this dialog box or drop down list, if I had not named that reference plane 1, I would not see it in this list. But I can select reference plane 1, OK. Again, I'm going to turn on show, and now you can see where that reference plane was, or currently is. That reference plane is in direct correlation. I drew the line in plan view, and essentially it's a reference plane that's going to move vertically up from that line. So now at this point I can say extrusion, and I can draw any shape that I want to and pull it directly off of that reference plane. So the next thing to show, beginning to get just a little bit more complicated, is how to make slightly more complicated shapes from these objects. So let's go to this guy in particular, and let's go, I need to edit this component. So I'm going to select it, I'm going to say edit in place, I'm going to select this first blocks and say edit extrusion. And again, this pulls me back to sort of the root form that's defining it, which is this set of purple lines. If I come in and do another set of purple lines, it's going to define that as a hollow object. So that's one way to start increasing the complexity, is I can come in and I can make this object slightly more complicated. So let's put an arch on this side, and I can do something like that. So that's sort of the beginning point of making an object more complicated, is simply making that base a little bit more complicated of a shape. But I can also come in and begin adding holes or different forms to this as well by using void forms. So voids are just subtractions out of this solid. So if I wanted to put an opening all the way through these pieces, I could come in and say void forms, void extrusion, set my work plane by picking a plane, and I can select this edge. Now I can come across this edge and do a fairly large square, 20 feet tall, 16 feet wide. I'm going to green check that as OK, and I'm going to slide it all the way through my form, so it's actually extending out of the form on both sides. And now I actually have a cut in that. And this would be a really tricky thing to make just as a simple extrusion, but really easy to do using that void form. On occasion, objects for some reason or another will kind of get a little bit confused and one won't cut the other. And so there is a set of tools right here that can be really helpful in terms of defining what is and isn't cutting. So I can say cut, uncut geometry, this and this, and now they're no longer cutting. In fact, if I select, should probably get an error message when I green check because I have a void form not cutting any geometry. Yeah, it's saying void form's not cutting, so I'm going to click cancel. So when that happens, and most often it's going to happen this way, that you've built a void form and for some reason it's not cutting anything. Really simply, you can come right back to this tool and say cut. This object gets cut by this void. So now when I green check, it knows that those two things are working together. So if I wanted to come back and edit that void cut, simply enough, I can select my object, edit in place. This gets me to this component. I can select my void form. They can sometimes be a little bit tricky to find, and that's where using the tab key comes in handy. So right now what I'm doing is I'm just pressing the tab key one click at a time on the tab button on the keyboard, and the tab button is going to cycle through all of your selection options for the given location that your cursor right here is at. So by toggling through, I can find my void form. So it's highlighted but not selected yet. I can left click to select it, and now I can come back in, edit the extrusion, I can change the shape, or I can type in a specific dimension. Green checkbox, and get a different kind of cut. So that's the beginning point of working with void forms, with working with custom components, and all of the different ways that you can begin building component objects, especially using reference planes. From this set of tools, you can really start building any custom object that you want. It gets more advanced from there, in particular if you choose the massing components tool set, but that's for another video at a different time.